Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abby Parsons, and I'm the Senior Courses Manager at Curtis Brown Creative. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to this very special webinar, How I Got Published, with Curtis Brown literary agent Steph Thwaites and her client Cynthia Murphy, who is the author of 6 young adult horror/thrillers, including Last One to Die and Lose, Kill, Die, to just mention a couple. And I'm very pleased to be your host for this webinar, which is second of 2, which we are offering to celebrate reaching 200 major publishing deals for CBC's former students. And perhaps some of you who are here, you might have joined the session a couple of weeks ago with Felicity Blunt and Amelia Hart. So if you're back, hello again. And yeah, again, it's brilliant to have so many of you here today. I think there's hundreds of you, which is exciting. And I can see you popping up in the chat there, so that's lovely, saying hi. And thank you for those of you who sent lots of questions in advance. I'm going to be putting as many of those as possible today as I can to Steph and Cynthia on your behalf. I know we won't be able to cover everything, but hopefully we'll cover the big ones that lots of you sent through, that we got lots of queries about. And what we're also going to do is leave about 10 minutes towards the end for further questions. So if you do have a question that you feel hasn't been covered, what you can do is use the Q&A function, which should be somewhere on your Zoom screen. So rather than the chat for that, to bring that question to our attention, that's the best way, is a Q&A function. And again, what we'll do is try and get through as many of those as we can before we then say goodbye at 6 o'clock. So one final bit of housekeeping. I just wanted to mention that while we don't have live captioning on this webinar, a recording of the webinar will be made available to you after the event, and that will have captions in place. So I think that's everything I need to say before we get started. And I'm going to begin by introducing our guests properly. So I'll begin with Cynthia. Cynthia Murphy is a young adult horror/thriller writer from the northwest of England. Her books are published by Scholastic and Barrington Stoke in the UK and Delacorte Press in the US. Include her extremely pacey debut, Last One to Die, the TikTok viral sensation, Win, Lose, Kill, Die, and her latest thriller as well, Signed, Sealed, Dead. She describes herself, and I really love this, as having a long-standing love affair with all things scary, reading point horrors at primary school before graduating to Stephen King. So looking forward to hearing more about those interests later. And of course, Cynthia studied on our Writing YA and Children's Fiction course with tutor Catherine Johnson in 2015. And we're here today in part to ring in the 200 former CBC students with publishing deals. But it's especially lovely to have you here, Cynthia, as you are in fact our 100th student to go on to get a major publishing deal a few years ago. So yeah, very much looking forward to chatting to you about all of that. And Steph Thwaites has been an agent at Curtis Brown for almost 20 years, joining shortly after studying English literature at university and building an eclectic list of authors and a reputation as a tenacious negotiator and fierce champion for her clients. At Curtis Brown, she is now head of the book department, and within it, head of the newly established children's division. Steph represents a broad range of writers, from debut authors to literary estates, #1 and Sunday Times bestselling authors, and prize winners writing quality commercial fiction and non-fiction, short stories, YA novels, and middle grade fiction. Alongside Cynthia, her clients include Bella Mackie, Harriet Evans, Jessie Cabe, Tom Fletcher, Greg James, and Chris Smith, to name a few. And Steph has spoken to lots of our students on courses in London and online across the years, so very pleased to have you here with Cynthia, Steph. And to begin, I'm going to dive straight into questions because I'm aware of the time ticking away and covering as much as. If we could start with you, Cynthia. So you write YA horror, and I'd just love to start by asking you about writing your first published novel, Last One to Die, and whether you set out to write a novel for teen readers and how that story took shape.
Yeah, I did immediately. I think I've always written either YA or I was saying before I tried middle grade at one point, but it was a little bit too dark for middle grade. Um, but YA is like my happy place. I am still a big teenager at heart. I love teen dramas. I love YA novels. And when I set out to write it, I was kind of at that point where I was like, I'm going to write the novel that I would read or that teenage me would have read. And hopefully, somebody else will like it. But it was a bit of a last ditch attempt to just do something for me. And I thought if it never gets anywhere, at least I've had a really good time while I wrote it. So I remember really pompously texting my friend and saying, I'm going to write a point horror. I'm going to write the next, like, I'm going to bring point horror back. Um, and it was really funny because then that ended up being the tagline of my first book, like point horror for the new generation. And that was amazing.
I love that. And yeah, we're going to come on, I think, to talk about finding a pitch for your novel later. So it would be great to talk more about that in more depth. And it would be lovely to hear about how you started, how you studied with us at CBC and the kind of role that played in your writing and how it developed and what you kind of took away from that course and your tutor, Catherine Johnson.
Yeah, so I had written a novel and it was a YA, but it was a bit like it was an urban fantasy. So there was horror elements in it, but it was a bit everywhere. And I did the diligent thing and sent it out to agents and it got rejected by everybody or, ignored. Um, and I kind of came out of it quite disappointed because I'd had it in my head that obviously this is the greatest thing that anyone's ever written and it's going to be signed up immediately, which I think we all do. Um, because you love it so much. But when I came out of it, I was a bit like, well, actually, I don't really know what I'm doing. Um, so I had written this book, and I thought if I can write one, then surely I can write another one. But I probably need a little bit of guidance because I hadn't really read any craft stuff. I'd just gone on my knowledge of books that I'd read in the past, and that it needed a start, a middle, and an end, and exciting stuff to happen. And that's what I'd written. Like I'd be quite scared to go back and to be something publishable. Um, so I had a look around for courses. I'm in Manchester, so there was nothing really local to me that wasn't an MA or something that required like a lot of my time. But I was a primary school teacher at the time, so I didn't have a great deal of time. So an online course seemed brilliant, but then it was finding a reputable one and one that looked like you would actually get some benefit from at the end. So when I saw the Curtis Brown one, I think the biggest draw for me was like writing with other people, but then getting it in front of an agent who had to look at it. Because I'd been through the process of like submitting and not hearing back off people. So I thought, well, now someone will have to read it. That can only be a good thing. So I ended up on, I think it was the autumn 2015 course. I still have friends from that course now. Stuart White, who runs Write Mentor, was on that course, who, has gone on to do really well, and he was a good friend. And other people have been published off the back of it, and it became a really nice kind of little writing community where we'd kind of come out of it, and most of us were still getting rejections and still kind of going along and thinking we need to write something else. But we had that community and we had each other's back a little bit, and you had like a safe space to go and talk about things and have a little whinge and a little moan. And that all came about because of the course. And Catherine was just fab. I learned how to structure a story. I learned what a hook was. I learned, all of these different things that I'd been severely lacking from my first kind of go at it all. But the thing that Catherine said to me, I remember being on a phone call with her, and she said, just don't give up. She said, whatever it is, you have got it, and just keep going. Like, you're going to get no's and you're going to get rejections, and that's the industry. But there's something in there that you just need to keep going. So when I had those moments of getting rejections or not feeling like I could carry on, I had that little Catherine Johnson voice in my ear that kind of somebody thought I could do it, so let's keep going.
That's really wonderful to hear. I think yeah, that encouragement and support from writing group is often something that comes up from our students that is hugely beneficial to have that group of writers as you kind of continue, because it is a long road. So that's really wonderful to hear. And I will just say quickly before I forget, for anybody who is interested in that 3-month course, it is online, and so yeah, it's very flexible. We run it a couple of times a year, usually in January, February and October. It's with brilliant Catherine Johnson, and the upcoming 2024 date will be up soon, but we have our next course starting very soon. It starts next week, so excited to meet those students. And actually I think we have had just a space open up, so if anybody, it's the right timing to sort of jump into a course, I think we do have a last minute space available. So if, you know, put in an application on the course page if you'd like to. That is, yeah, brilliant to hear about your experience. And I'm keen to come to Steph and say first hello, and also to find out from your side of things, Steph, about what about Cynthia's writing and the pitch for Last One to Die, when it made its way to you. What made it stand out and really appeal to you?
Hi, Abby, and hi, everyone. I really love this question, actually. I've been reflecting on it a bit, and it's sort of taken me back to that moment when I was reading those initial chapters and then the full manuscript. And actually, as an agent, one of the most exciting parts is that discovery, and is that kind of like tingly feeling that, you know, you're onto something really special. And I think Cynthia's, in fact, I know she's just found it, so I am going to put her on the spot and make her read it out to everyone at some point. It was a great pitch. It was succinct. It was really appealing to me because she mentioned point horror, which we both had like a real shared love of. The fact she mentioned the CBC course as well definitely like piqued my interest. But I also think that it just felt like we were on the same wavelength. It was exactly the kind of book that I would love to read and was really excited to receive. And I think that that's also something to consider, is there is actually a huge amount of subjectivity in this business. So you won't always necessarily hit on the right agent, but when you do, I think it's really super exciting for both parties. And Cynthia actually had representation elsewhere beforehand, and when I was reading the manuscript, I think there were 9 other agents who were also offering representation. But I just remember feeling so desperate, like I knew I had to represent Cynthia. I remember also like swimming at one point, which I don't do that regularly, so slightly random memory, but just like not wanting to be in the pool anymore because I wanted to get out and carry on reading. And I think when you feel that as an agent, you know that that's what readers are going to feel when they come to the manuscript too. It was also really polished because Cynthia, I think, had that experience. It wasn't the first manuscript that she'd written, and she'd had that experience working on the course too. The draft that I read, really, I mean, we did work on it a little bit together. I think this is preempting one of your questions, Abby, but it did need a huge amount of work, and so much of it was there already. So I spoke to Cynthia, and then we met in person. And I think I had like a few nerve-wracking days. It's sort of a weird thing, agenting sometimes. It's kind of like a bit of a strange version of dating almost. And actually, I think you said that to me when we met. You made that comparison. And I think it is really important, where possible, to meet, to just make sure you have that connection, because you are going to be working together. I guess not unlike other kinds of relationships that dating results in, but actually you're going to be working together for a long time. You hope that's going to be a relationship that lasts for, you know, the length of a career. So you want to feel that you get on, that you're on the same wavelength, that you have that connection. And I think I actually felt that from the initial letter that came in.
That's great. I'm looking forward to hearing the pitch later. That's I didn't want to put Cynthia on the spot, but Steph, you've done it, so that's great with the pitch letter. And actually, Steph, you talked a little bit there about the role of an agent, and I had a question in from Joanne who wanted to ask that question. I always think it's a great question to cover, like what a literary agent does. So I wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about that whilst we're on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, agents do work a bit differently, and it can vary from client to client. But essentially, I will always tend to work on a manuscript a bit with an author. I like to give feedback and editorial input before we take it out to publishers. I like to manuscripts in the best possible place and give it the best chance of finding the right home. When I'm reading it, I'll be thinking of the individual editors in different publishing houses who I think would be a really good fit for it. So I'll already kind of be building my list, even actually before I've taken that author on. I'll have sort of like names that will be popping into my head of editors I think it would really resonate with. And then what we do is we'd pitch to publishers. We'd ideally have several people interested, and then we would conduct an auction. We decide and figure out and negotiate how the rights would fall. Sometimes we can retain some of those and exploit those separately. We've got a translation rights team of 24 people, and they sometimes sell our international rights, sell those to the publisher, and then the publishing house will exploit those rights. We might sometimes retain US rights. So all of that, we'll make decisions based on the kind of offers that come in and the opportunities that are there for the author. We'll negotiate the deal, we'll draw up the contract, we'll make sure that the publisher's doing everything that they're supposed to be doing at every step along the way, leading up to publication and beyond. We'll then collect the royalties as well, and we'll make sure we pay out all the money that the author's due to. We will help manage their career. As I mentioned, ideally this relationship is a long-term one. So sometimes there'll be a change in direction. Sometimes authors might want to work in a different genre or work, on the children's side, right across for, different age groups. So we'll advise every step along the way, and we're there to support the author and champion the author, be on the author's side, but also work collaboratively with publishers too, to ensure that we've got the best possible outcome for all parties, but mainly for the author.
That's great. Thank you so much for covering that. I think that's just really helpful to get that overview. So that's brilliant. And a question sort of for you both, I guess, from the different sides that came in was, what should first-time authors look for in a literary agent? I guess, how do you kind of find that fit and that match? Cynthia, I don't know if you would be able to speak a little bit about what you think is important from an author's perspective.
Yeah, so as Steph mentioned, I was represented before. It was actually for the thing that I'd written on the Curtis Brown course. And I never signed anything. Which at the time I was just so excited that somebody had shown interest and that kind of thing, but there was never kind of a contract involved, which should have been a bit of a red flag. But I think you're just so excited that somebody has had this chat with you, and we're going to send it to publishers and we're going to do this, that, and the other. So when I got to a point where we were going to submit to publishers, or so I thought, it no longer fit the interests of that person, and we kind of parted ways. But because I hadn't signed anything, there was absolutely kind of nothing I could do about it. So I think number one for me is just that absolute clarity of, I am going to represent you. This is a thing that we're going to do. This is, a legal document. This is how serious I am. Let's sign it. So that would be my number one. Because that was a lot of heartache that I shouldn't have, that I didn't need. But I think definitely you've got to gel. When I sent Last One to Die Out, I did have some really lovely offers, and I spoke to a lot of people, and there were some people who immediately were lovely, but I just knew we're not on the same wavelength. If I come to you with a wacky idea, about a horror in this, you're not going to get it, or you're just going to say no, or you need someone with almost that kind of same sense of humor. That's important for me anyway. I think, I can make a joke and Steph will actually get it, and some people might not, and to me that's quite important. And I can send through an idea and she can either say, no, I don't think that's going to work right now, or say, yes, I think it's great, let's go with it. Rather than, I know some people who have, been with their agent and it's been kind of a bit more of a business affair, and they've not clicked on that level. So you can't, I think it tends to lead to the communication breaking down a little bit. And I think that's where you see people parting ways and having to look for representation elsewhere. So I think, yeah, same wavelength, same just that same kind of vision. When Steph had offered, she actually rang me out of the blue, because I remember it because I was in my classroom and all the kids had gone to PE, so I should have been doing work, and my phone rang, and I reckon it was like a number that I didn't know, and normally I would just ignore it and let it go to voicemail, but because I was in the middle of all of this, I went and hid in the cloakroom and I picked up my phone. I'd get fired now if I was still at that school. And it was Steph, and she was like, I've just started reading it. She said, but I had to ring you just because I want to let you know that I really like it, and I'm interested. And I was like, this is so cool. And just that initial excitement, rather than, some people don't get back to you for ages, and then you'll get a very formal email of, oh yes, I did quite like this, and maybe we could arrange a meeting. Steph just rang me, dead excited on the phone. And that was just, when somebody kind of gets your writing that you've been doing on your own in your bedroom for months and months and months, and somebody else is that excited about it, it's really, really special. And yeah, we just had the same vision for it when, Scholastic made their offer, and Steph said, I think it's a good home, and I agreed. And things that have happened since, that things just click along quite nicely, and I don't feel that I can't ask for advice. I don't feel that I can't, I don't know, send on good news or anything that I feel like I need to discuss. We can do it, and it's really nice. So I think I just feel comfortable. It's a really nice, comfortable relationship. Supportive. Yeah, I could.
That's so nice to hear. And just to add to that, I want to elaborate on what Cin's already said. I think being able to be direct and have like frank and honest conversations too, it's really important as well. And I do think you need to feel comfortable asking anything or being able to pick up the phone, and also to be responsive. And I think it can often be the case that people are not hearing back as quickly as they should from agents. And I think that communication and those channels of communication are really key to a good relationship.
Yeah, I think responsive is a massive one, because I didn't have that before. And I remember that was one thing that I said to you, like, how long does it take to respond to an email? And you were like, a day. And I was like, really? That's amazing. Yeah, that's really, really important, because there's a lot of waiting in publishing, and it can be quite nail biting. So the one person you kind of need to be responsive is the person who's meant to be holding your hand.
Yeah, and also you assume that if it's no news, then it's bad news.
Yeah.
So it's good to know what it is, even if it's
Well, that's great. Thank you both for talking around that. It's really good to hear kind of the things that that writers in that position of submitting and kind of having conversations with agents. What's a green flag, and those open channels of communication sounds really important. So another question along these lines around submitting that came in from Kate was around when you should submit to agents. So do you need to have a full manuscript ready before you submit, or could you talk a bit around that, maybe starting with Steph?
I think ideally it is good to have the full manuscript ready, because if an agent reads the first few chapters and then they want to read the rest, of course they can wait and will wait for the rest, but you kind of want to keep that momentum going. So I think ideally have a first draft ready when you do submit.
Yeah, that's great. We do often get that question. I think some people, they know there's a wait sometimes involved, and so they'll try and get ahead a little bit. But yeah, having that full manuscript that you can just send when someone expresses interest, I think is a really good idea. And I think there's also that really tough question around when are you ready to send it? And I think that can be really hard, like to know when manuscript is you've done enough work and it's time to step away and send it. I don't know, Cynthia, if you have any kind of advice around when a story feels ready to share.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not a massive editor. That sounds awful, doesn't it? I will do my first draft, but it will take me a while. So it'll take me 6 months, and I'll do my research and I'll get everything I want in. And then I go back to the beginning and I just polish it. So just make sure it's as tight as it can be, you know, I try and look at it with a critical eye and think, do I need to chop anything? Or, you know, is this a bit flat? Does this need bumping up a little bit? And after I've done that, generally, I just kind of need to get it away from me. So, you know, you spend so much time on these things that I think when you're at that point where you can't look at it anymore and you've got that like fizzing excitement that you just need to get it over to somebody else, then that's the time to do it. Because I know some people go through loads of drafts, some people just do that first initial one. And I do think there's something to be said about going back and reading what you've got from the beginning, tightening it up, even if that's all you do. That's what I tend to do. But then I know some people who will go back to the beginning and they will layer things in, or they might have kept a subplot out that they want to go back and then layer in afterwards. So I think everyone works really differently. But I definitely think when you get to that point, I think when you get to the end of reading it and you're equally really excited and proud of yourself, but also never want to see it again, I think that's a really good way to like gauge when somebody else should be looking at it. Because I think you can overdo it. I think when you're fed up with it, your full heart and soul doesn't kind of go into it anymore. Or you will need a big break from it. And if you want to submit to agents, you might not want to take too much of a break. And just to chime in on what Steph was saying about the full manuscript as well, when I sent out Last One to Die, it was a day or 2 days, and then I was asked for the full. So it was really, really, everything went really fast. And if I hadn't have had that full manuscript ready, I don't think we would have had the momentum that we did. And then I was also very good at emailing agents and saying, just to let you know, it's now with, you know, however many other people. But because I had that full manuscript ready, it kind of, I could just send it out. I knew I was happy with it. I knew I was happy with it. I didn't have to spend like a couple of days panic editing. So I would, yeah, as much as you don't want to, because sometimes it can take ages, or you might think, well, you know what, I'm nearly there and maybe it'll give me the little push to finish it. I would wholeheartedly recommend just having a full thing ready to go. So it takes the stress out of it and it makes everything a bit more exciting.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that sounds, yeah, particularly speedy, but yeah, definitely a good example. That full manuscript is a great idea. And just to say, if anybody is at that stage of approaching the read through, maybe you're still writing and you kind of see the read through on the horizon, you possibly might be interested. We have a 1-day course with our CBC founder Anna Davis, which is called the Rewrite Doctor, and that talks you through kind of a way to approach that big edit rewrite if you're in that stage where that's what you feel needs to happen. Guidance about how to go about that, but you might be in that happy stage that Cynthia just described of being raring to go. So that sounds great. Okay, we've got a couple more questions on pitching before we move on to talk a bit more about writing the next step. So I have a question in from Samantha, which is, if someone has queried agents previously with past manuscripts that have not been taken on, might they be put off when further new manuscripts are submitted, having remembered what has gone before? Steph?
I think usually I mean, for me anyway, if I like the writing and I see the potential but that manuscript isn't right, then I will definitely invite people to resubmit future manuscripts. So I think agents would probably say that. I mean, there are so many agents, and actually usually you can only submit to one per agency. So it probably is best, if you haven't had success with the first one, to try a different agent at that agency, or to try different agents at different agencies, rather than submitting again to the same one, unless they've specifically said to send it. But there are there's no kind of like fixed rules around it, and you could certainly go ahead and resend it, or even just query and ask whether they'd be happy to see it.
That's great. Thank you for that. And another kind of quick question, is there a good time to submit to agents, I guess, in terms of the calendar year?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and I feel like all agents should want submissions all the time. I mean, that is really like the heart of what we do. So there shouldn't really be a bad time. I guess it would only, I guess the whole of publishing kind of shuts down around December, towards the end of December. So maybe that's not a great time. And then the Frankfurt Book Fair in October is often a time where people are quite distracted. And you could literally go through all the different times where people are distracted, because you have Bologna Book Fair and London Book Fair. And I think if you're submitting to the right agent, they're going to be the right fit for you. It doesn't really matter when that happens. But yeah, probably not Christmas Day or New Year's Eve.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so coming on to Cynthia, your kind of thoughts on the pitch and finding the hook. I wondered if for you, you talked about point horror earlier and knowing that's kind of book you wanted to write, but I wondered whether you start with a clear idea of the pitch or the hook, or whether you get the words down and then it's a bit of work kind of finding what the hook is there.
No, I think I'm really good at writing one paragraph of what this book will be, and then I have to go and actually write it. So yeah, so when I start writing, I need to know my opening. Like, I just have to have an image in my head of how it's going to begin. And I need to know my ending, I've found out, which I think when I wrote my very, very first manuscript, I had no idea. It was great fun. I just kept going like forever. But I need to have an end in sight, because then I can work towards it. And also because, like, just I think the way my brain works, it all festers in there for like 6 months, and then I get it down. And then when I go back to the beginning and I edit through, I don't like to chop too much around, so I will write quite structurally. So it really helps me to have that end, because if I know my twist and I know my bad guy and I know my ending, I can kind of put in those red herrings and little clues along the way and not have to go back and layer them in too much afterwards. And then, like, when you work with an editor at a publishing house, they will read it through and they'll go, you know what, you've put this in and it makes it way too obvious about what's going to happen here. And that clean pair of eyes, like, you just can cut that bit out then. But yeah, I like to have like a blurb, like the back of the book, something that will get me interested in wanting to write it, and then I can go and do it.
Is this a good moment for you to read your initial
well
pitch?
But this is like completely different, because then this one is what I wrote after I'd written the book, so it's completely opposite to what I've just said. But you have to write one, don't you, at the end for when you submit to agents. So yeah, I've got it somewhere, so I found it. So it used to be called Creeper. So I think when I was like doing all of my research on agents and looking into, you know, query letters that had worked, I remember at the time some people had actually posted theirs online, and it was really helpful to see successful ones. And what I'd noticed at the beginning was, like, nobody went in with, you know, pleasantries or, you know, word count. They just like got straight into the story. So I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. So I got, Dear Stephanie, young women are being attacked by someone or something in the city of London. 16-year-old Neve, fresh off the boat from small town life in Ireland, is plunged straight into the horror when she stumbles across the scene of a murder in the room that she should have been staying in. Despite this, Neve is determined to complete the course that she has worked so hard for and begins her placement at the Victorian Street Museum. As she struggles to decide exactly who among her new friends she can trust, the ghosts of an ancient love story begin to claw their way to the surface, and the attacks are creeping ever closer. And then I've kind of said, Creeper is a young adult horror manuscript, complete blah, blah, blah. I did put in it, actually, I've emailed you previously with a manuscript, but I think Steph was actually on mat leave. And that was the one from Curtis Brown. I mentioned point horror. I talked about penny dreadfuls and the characters of Victorian England that had kind of inspired the story. And then I said, I believe this manuscript will sit well beside books from the Red Eye series by Stripes, or novels like those by Sue Allman or Karen McManus. And then I have like a little paragraph about me, a couple of things, like I had a manuscript featured on Wattpad, which at that time was like my greatest achievement. I'd like got a couple of Twitter pitch competitions, and I'd put all that on there, and then I'd put my I think I put my Twitter handle or my Instagram handle, and that was it. So thank you very much. So it was really, it's probably an A4, if that. and it just straight into the story, but without any spoilers, and then the boring bit at the end.
Well, none of it was boring. I think that hits all the right notes. I think the only thing that I always say that I'm less interested in, but other agents feel differently, is word count. That's the only thing I kind of just like, unless it's super long, and then you're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, that sounds a bit like. But I think everything else, like you say, a bit about you, a bit about relevant writing experience, a great, really engaging description of the book, which is a bit blurby, doesn't give too many things away, but is enough to kind of like pull you in.
Yeah, because then you've got your synopsis as well, haven't you, where you kind of list everything out that happens. So you don't want to duplicate that. And synopsis can be really dry.
Yeah, I tend not to read them. I tend to like only first 3 chapters, and then I like really want to find out where the story is going. But I never read them first. Like I always go straight to the chapters first.
Well, that's great. That's so useful for you to read out. Thank you, Cynthia and Steph.
Yeah, and I still love it.
That blurb,
still in.
I mean, you can see exactly why that caught your attention, Steph. That blurb feels so much like it is already evoking the tone of the book and kind of pulling you into the story. So
one thing, sorry, just to jump in quickly, one thing worth bearing in mind is that the title used to be Creeper, so the title started as Creeper. So I would say just don't be too concerned if the title that you've got on the manuscript at the moment doesn't feel like the right one. That is something that would, you know, easily change further down the line, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that.
Yeah, don't be married to it, because someone will probably change it. I was on book 3 before they let me keep a title.
And that was, just to clarify, that was last one to that.
That was last one. So that was that was
the
4th manuscript that I'd written, but it was the first book that was published.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, and so it's moving a bit from pitching into the writing process. And so you touched on a bit there, your kind of approach to planning a little bit, that you have kind of a succinct outline before you dive in. Could you talk, I've got a question from Victoria about whether you have a particular method for planning your plot when you have lots of ideas floating around, I guess lots of directions you could take it. Do you have any advice around that?
I'm trying to teach myself to be a good plotter. I think Last One to Die just happened. I used some of the stuff from the course that helped me structure the like different acts, but I didn't stick to it too strenuously because I found it a bit. I think I'm one of those people when you tell me exactly what to do, it makes me not want to do it. So I kind of used it as a loose model, and then I've got slightly better because I find that the more I've done beforehand, the easier the book is to write, which makes complete sense, doesn't it? So recently my plotting strategy has kind of been, I have my big opener, so my big inciting incident, and then I've got my twist, which for me normally comes I want to say 80% into the book, like as long as I can leave it, so you've got that kind of jaw drop moment at the end, and then I just want the tension to build and build and build. So I just tend to plot, this needs to happen at some point, and then this needs to happen. And I tend to do it with Post-its, and I stick them on my wall and kind of do it in that the arc, you know, like plotting out scenes, like Save the Cat type thing. I don't think they'd let me use that though, because it's so far from it. And sometimes they'll swap around. I've actually got on, oh no, I think I took them off the other day, the book that I've just finished proofreading that's out in January, I had it plotted on my wall. When I say I had it plotted, I'd done like 4 Post-its, and then I'd got so carried away with the story that I didn't need to do the Post-its anymore. And the other day when I came in, those like sad little Post-its were still there that had been, and I'd moved stuff around anyway. So I think
that one's so well plotted. I can't understand that you think you're not good at, or that you say that you're not good at plotting, because actually
I think I'm not good at doing it on paper. Like it all happens in my brain, which is a bit messy. You know, it's like a lot of thoughts. So it would be nice to be able to get it on paper and maybe get it out of my head a little bit. But yeah, I think as long as I've got something to work, like the big incidents to work towards, I find I can write in between it, because the in-between bits are those kind of relationships and getting to know the characters a little bit, and, you know, layering in a little bit of, is that person a bit dodgy, or you know, is that person a bit dodgy? And my main points tend to be like, there'll be a death, or there'll be an incident, or, you know, something terrible will happen. I think with Win, Lose, Kill, Die, my post-it, I did do a full post-it wall for that one. And it was literally somebody dies, somebody dies, somebody, and I just had to get to that point where I killed that person. And that was my plot instructor for that. So it's kind of slightly getting better as I carry on. But I would say it's a very, very loose version of Save the Cat, which is a screenwriting thing anyway. So I think you can do it.
That's great, thank you. It's always interesting to hear. I think everybody has different styles, but it's always interesting to hear different writers' approaches. So thank you. And I am going to come on to a question around, so this is from someone who's also a teacher, and they ask if you have any tips on how to manage writing during term time. And I guess, you know, for anyone else writing generally around other commitments, do you have any tips around that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't teach anymore, and I think I've probably managed my time a little bit better when I did, because I think you have to cram it into when you can. So I was like evenings, weekends, half term, but then I didn't have children. You know, so my time was my own in those times. And I think, especially with Last One to Die, once I'd kind of committed to writing that, it had to come out. I just had to do it. And I remember we went on holiday. I was doing it on my iPad on the aeroplane, and actually loving like that you can't hear anything on an aeroplane, because it meant that I could just get loads done. We drove up to Leeds one day, which is only an hour from us, but I took the laptop and wrote on my knee in the car while my husband drove. And it, you know, it was those kind of snatches of time that built that book. Win, Lose, Kill, Die was a COVID book, and I was teaching online all day, and then I was kind of logging off and just trying to get to a word count every day. So setting little goals, I think. I think Last One to Die was the first self-imposed goal I ever set myself in terms of time. So I remember saying to myself that I wanted to have it done for Halloween, because it was a spooky book. And I thought, and spooky people like spooky things, and even not spooky people like spooky things in Halloween. So it felt like a good time to be sending it out. So once I had that in my head that it had to be done by October, I just kind of crammed in every moment that I could do. So I think little deadlines can be good, and then they are really helpful in the future when you get an actual deadline that you have to, like, you've got no choice, which can be a bit of a shock to the system.
So like from the publisher, the delivery.
Yeah, like when it's Win, Lose, Kill, Die, I remember they were like, oh, and can it be in by April or May, I think it was, and Last One to Die had come out in January, and I was in the middle of all that debut, like, you know, trying to promote the book and stuff, and I was like, oh no, I have to write another book in that. And I'd pretty much done it before, but this time it wasn't on my terms, so it was a bit scarier. But yeah, I think as well, my big piece of advice is always have a break if you need a break. Like, it's not going anywhere. And I think if I'd have sent that book out in January or August, I think that the people who found it would have still found it. You know, maybe my emails got answered a bit more because people were in the mood for something spooky, but don't work yourself into the ground, because teaching's so hard. And I feel like for me, writing was a hobby, and it was something I really enjoyed doing, and it was a little bit of escapism. And when it stops feeling like that, you might need to just step away from it for a little bit. And obviously, you know, teaching's your job, and it's what you get paid for, so that needs to be a bit of a priority. But yeah, I think just do it for the enjoyment of doing it, and then set yourself a little deadline, and hopefully, you know, when you get to that point, exciting things will happen. If you burn out in the middle, don't beat yourself up, and, you know, put it away. It'll still be there in 6 months. You know, you'll probably be a better writer in 6 months, so it could be even better than it was going to be in the first place.
That's great. I think that's really fantastic advice. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to some questions that I kind of zoomed out a little bit, kind of looking at the broader industry/market. And I have a really interesting question from Stephanie about the YA market, which she says seems dominated by American writers such as Leigh Bardugo, Karen M. McManus, Holly Black, And she says British writers are just as talented. So what needs to happen for a British writer to go global in the YA market? And of course, Cynthia, you are published in the US as well. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear, you know, Steph, Cynthia, any thoughts on YA and that difference?
Look, I mean, it's a much larger market, and it is a much more mature market. Like when we were reading, Cynthia and I were growing up and reading YA, it was really basically just point horror, and like those 90210 books. You know, there weren't that many specific YA books. So it is a younger and newer category here. And actually, I would say that there are a lot of, yeah, Christopher Pike as well. Exactly. But there weren't very many. And I think it's developed, and they're incredibly talented writers, and actually lots who are really working globally, and not just in the US as well. Like we tend to think just about the UK and the US, but there's all the international markets too. Emily Barr, who teaches on course as well, her books have been translated in 26 different languages. So you can have international success that's not just about the US necessarily. Then you look at somebody like Holly Jackson, who really has broken out and dominated. I mean, she's been on the New York Times bestseller list for years. The Scandal books as well have become a sort of really, you know, I mean, they're less YA, I suppose they're slightly younger than YA, but have really broken out into lots of different territories. And some of it is luck and timing, which is the case often with publishing generally, whether it's in the adult market or the children's market or the YA market. And I know that's maybe not very helpful, but I think it's quite hopeful actually too, because you never quite know. If we knew, then we would just like bottle it and do it again and again. But like each book and each author has a different journey. And you know, it's taken some time. Cynthia is now about to be published in the US, but initially got 7 books under contract with Delacour, who published Holly Jackson, and who are very ambitious for Cynthia to move into that space and break out in a really big way. And they've got a very exciting plan for her for next year. And actually, I hope you don't mind if I'm not oversharing here. But I think it's really helped that actually it's happening now that she has several books under her belt, because what they're going to be doing is publishing 1 a season. So they're going to publish 4 next year. And that could never have happened if that had happened at the start of her career. So I think there's also something about patience and perseverance here, which Cynthia touched on before. And I think it's enormously important at every different stage in publishing. You know, when you're first writing and trying to finish that first draft, when you're first submitting to agents, when you're submitting to publishers, and even once you're published, I think you have to really stick with it, really want to do it, and really persevere. And things will, you know, you will get there. But yeah, it's not always a predictable path or route. And I would think about the whole international picture as well, not just the US, I suppose.
Yeah, because I think my US rights deal came almost 3 years after my actual UK deal. So, and I wasn't expecting it. I think I thought that ship had sailed, you know, it'll be with a future book or so it's very exciting. But like Steph said, then they acquired everything, and now they have this plan, and they're all just going to come out in kind of 1 year, and you won't be able to move for my books. And it's been really, really exciting. But it wasn't, you know, you hear about like debuts making it really big and overnight successes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it would have all been very, very overwhelming if my first book would have come along and, you know, they'd have come along and said, can we get all of this done? Or, you know, do you have anything else under your belt? I would have been completely unprepared. So it's been nice to have a little bit of experience before that kind of happened.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, I have one question from this list that I want to come to, and then we'll Q&A that we can in the time. So the question I just wanted to touch on was whether having a younger readership kind of determines the topics of your book, Cynthia, and how it does, because obviously you're writing in a fairly kind of dark area, and so there's obviously a line there. And I just wondered if you could talk fairly briefly, sorry to put you on the spot, but about that and kind of working out what will appeal to them.
Yeah, I think in that space for me, TV kind of really helped. You know, when you look at the kind of programs that are marketed towards teenagers. So I would have grown up watching like I don't know, Veronica Mars and things like that. And that was quite dark. And then you look at stuff like Riverdale that's just finished on Netflix, or any kind of teen drama. They talk about real issues, and you know, they'll have like a gory murder on screen, or they'll talk about sex, or they'll have relationships. So I kind of felt safe that I could go into those spaces. But for me, for the first book especially, I was a primary school teacher, so I was very, very aware of that. So I always refer to Last One to Die as like clean teen, but with murders. And the murders tend to happen off the page, you know, they're kind of more alluded to. But then by the time we got to the Midnight Game, which was my third book, we were having like full on gory murders fully on screen, and dealing with like some little darker aspects that maybe I didn't feel confident enough to deal with when I knew I had the responsibility of like a lot of little people in my care. And that was just me. That was just a thing. I think I always had this vision of one of the kids coming in with one of my books and being like, I read this last night. And I thought, if that ever happens, then I need to be able to defend myself. Um, but I think you can go for it with YA. I think, and again, like publishers, agents, editors, they're gonna let you know when too much is too much. Or there was a scene in the Midnight Game that I had to slightly tone down, um, because it was a little bit too gory, I think, for maybe a more sensitive younger reader. Because an 11-year-old will pick up YA, but so will a 34-year-old. So, you know, it's a funny balance. But for me, I'm writing for 12 to 18-year-olds in my head. So as long as they can cope with that stuff, then I think it's okay. Um, and I think it's really important that I show things with my I don't know how to say it, not my beliefs, but you know, I wouldn't have like a coercive relationship in something unless it was discussed that that is not an appropriate way to have a relationship. Or because, you know, you're not preaching, but you are talking to teenagers, and they're reading your stories, and they have to leave with some kind of, you know, I really like a final girl in the story, because I like that girl who just kind of just carries on and gets through everything and is really resilient and perseveres and will tell people no and will stand up for herself. Um, and I think that's quite important in YA. And I think you don't necessarily need that in adult. And I think it's very, very toned down in middle grade. But I think young adults are going through so much, then they want to get their teeth into something, but it needs to be believable, and they need to relate to it. You know, it's not preachy, it's just kind of realistic. Well, that's what I tried to do anyway.
And I think there does need to be a kind of safe moral framework for children's and for YA books too, in a way that you don't really need that for adult books. And again, as Cynthia said, that's something that an editor and agent can help you with, and can sort of steer a little bit too.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. Thanks both. I think that's really helpful to talk on. I'm going to come to a question in the chat, which is a question for Cynthia. And the question is, so he's aware that TikTok has kind of been used in the marketing of your books, and he wonders if you could talk more about the growing importance of this channel for authors, and what marketing a book on TikTok looks like, from a non-TikTok user, he says. So yeah, I think it'd be great to talk a bit about kind of the role TikTok has played.
So my TikTok, if you go and look on it, has got like a poor amount of views. Really, it's not a big account by any means. So it was used, marketing was done on TikTok from Scholastic, but only as much as they would market any other book. It was actually a really organic process. So last August, I was tagged in a video. Somebody had filmed my first page, put some music over it, and they'd kind of left the page on long enough that you could read it, because it's a whole chapter and it's a really short page. And then they closed the book and you could see the cover. And that was it. It was maybe 15, 20 seconds long. And then I think it was like 3 weeks later, I was away at a wedding. I had no signal on my phone all weekend. And on the Monday, my phone had gone mad. And another author had actually texted me and said, why is your book doing so suspiciously well on Amazon? And I was like, I don't know. And this TikTok had just blown up. And it was just a teenage reader who had loved the book and put the first page on, and whatever TikTok does, a lot of people had seen it. And to that day, I think that video's had like 3 million views. But then somebody else copied that video and did another one, and then that did really well. And so there's all of these little videos that have done well, and it's something like 7.4 million views now. The hashtag win, lose, kill, die has been seen, and then that translated into sales, and that book earned out on its own, which was unbelievable. And I did nothing.
So it actually, yeah, it came from a reader.
Yeah, completely. And that's why I think TikTok is getting really important, because I think readers spot the kind of created content, and they spot, nobody wants to see me constantly shoving my book in their face for, millions and millions of videos. But when somebody else likes something enough to share it, that's a very genuine thing. And especially teenage readers seem to really like that, because all the comments on those videos are from teenagers, and then they come and find me and they shout at me for killing their favorite character. And so they find me on TikTok that way. And it's just lovely. It's really good, but it was all completely out of my hands and amazing.
So in sort of add a question on there, and maybe one for Steph as well, how important do you think social media is for authors to have? I know that's a question that new writers kind of get hung up on quite a lot, whether they should be investing time in that.
To a point, I like social media, so it's not a chore for me to do stuff. I prefer Instagram. I like to take photographs, so that's my thing. But when I signed with Steph, I actually had everything locked. I'd had a not nice incident on Twitter, and I'd just gone off it, and I had all of my accounts locked. Obviously, I taught young children, so I didn't want them to come and find me, because they like to do that sometimes. And it was only when I think the first book had gone to print and they were putting the photograph in the back, and Steph said, do you think it's worth just setting up an open one with like a new handle, just so they can print it in the back of the book? Like, yeah, okay. So that is now my kind of author handle, and I've still got my private account that I keep locked, but I've got this one, and it's me and books and the dog basically. But I've got about 1,700 followers that I've built up over about 3 years, so it's not millions of followers. And sometimes when you're trying to like market, I feel a bit like I'm shouting into the void, like there's only those people who are going to see it, because unless somebody shares it, that kind of thing. So it can be useful, and it's useful for people to get in touch sometimes. But I started off kind of without it, and I don't think it did any harm whatsoever. And actually, I'm a little bit jealous of, you see those authors who are like too big for social media. Like they don't need one. They don't need a TikTok account because they're doing very well, thank you. That makes me a bit jealous. So I think if you like doing it, do it. I think it can help. I know Rosie Talbot, who I know was an ex-Curtis Brown course girl as well, she's like mega on TikTok, because she recommends books all the time. So for her, that led to her connecting with a publisher, which led to her publishing a book, which is unbelievable. So it can be amazing, but I think it's only if you love it and if you have the time and the energy to grow it that it's useful. I think if you don't enjoy it, then God, don't go near it. Like,
I just to reiterate that, agents can take you on solely because you've got a social media following if the book you're writing isn't great. So it's just more important to focus on the writing, I think, and do it if you feel it appeals and it works for you. But it's not crucial at all, and it's something you can come to at a later stage if you want to. There is quite a big publishing community on Twitter, so if you want to connect with other people or see what's going on, it can sometimes be good for that purpose, or for people to get in touch with you, as Cynthia said. But yeah, really not something that's necessary at all.
That's great. Thank you for talking on that both. Okay, I'm aware of time. I have a question that I think would be a really good one to end on, so I'm going to put it to you both if I can. So the question is, did you ever feel like giving up before you got published, Cynthia? And what kept you writing and trying to get published? But love advice from Cynthia and Steph on anything about kind of what you think would help writers keep going. But yeah, perhaps if I come to Cynthia first.
I gave up before last one to die. Like, I had a full on tantrum and 6 months of this is not for me and I'm never doing it again. I'd written 2 manuscripts. I had got nowhere with either of them. I got cancer in the middle, which was just rubbish. And then when I went back to writing, I was trying to write this 3rd one, and I actually got about 50,000 words in. And I was like, I don't like it. Why am I writing? I'd got to the point where I could have finished it and sent it off, but I didn't like it. And I felt like I was getting nowhere. And I just had one of those moments of maybe this just isn't for me. And I wasn't happy about it, but I thought, I just need to stop and focus on my job and focus on other things. And I just stopped, and I was really miserable. And my friend sent me a Point Horror t-shirt in the post, and she put a note in with it and said, this might help you get your writing mojo back. And then I went to the Northern Young Adult YA Festival as a kind of a paying attendee, and I wore my t-shirt and I sat there and I'd booked an agent 1-to-1, and I went and kind of just dumped on this poor agent. I was like, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. And I was like, oh. And I said, but I do have one idea and I'd had this idea while I was painting the fence, and it had just been like nagging at me. And I was like, what's YA horror looking like? And she just gave me this little nod, and she just went, that sounds like a good idea. And I felt like that it was that bit of insider information that I needed that it might get me somewhere. And I went away, and this story just like wrote itself in my head. And that was the point when I thought, I'll write it for me. I'll write it for teenage me. It's going to be a point horror. I'm going to do all the daft stuff that point horrors did. I want supernatural stuff in there. I don't care if people don't like it. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to have Victorian like myths and legends, and I just crammed everything that was me into a book. And at the end, I really, really loved it. And I was kind of happy with, if this one doesn't work, then that's it. Then maybe that's the one to give up on when I've, given it my all for one last time. And then that became the book that became my first published book. So I did. And that's why I said having a break is so important. Like, I needed that break, and I needed to have a sulk and 6 months of just hating everything, and then and something really good came out of it. So yeah, give up, pick it up again when I think you're a writer when you can't not do it. It's one of those weird things. It took me a long time to realize that was what the creative thing I should be doing was. And when you realize that, it's really hard to give up, but have that break if you need it.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that advice, Cynthia. It's really good to hear your experience of the kind of longer road that it can be. Steph, do you have any kind of advice for writers keeping going to add to that?
I think it's so common to have that experience. I think all writers will have that experience. There'll be ups and downs along the way. There'll be rejections along the way. Even as agents, we receive rejections. We try to take on clients. Sometimes they go elsewhere, or we want to sell a book that publishers will turn down. But I think it is about just continuing to persevere and to keep going, and to your people around you who can support you, whether it's through doing a course and then finding other writers who can help you through the really tricky sort of initial period, or the tricky periods beyond that as well. Or if it's about finding friends who are also writing too, just find people who help you keep going and who inspire you and help you stay motivated, and don't give up.
Because nobody gets it like another writer or somebody within the industry, because like your family's eyes will glaze over very quickly when you start talking about plotting and books, and but other writers just get it. So that community is really, really helpful when you're having a down day.
I think that's so true. So thank you for mentioning that and for all of the questions you both answered tonight. I will just mention one thing I haven't mentioned tonight, but might be, super relevant to the people listening, is our writing YA middle grade fiction course, which is a 6-week course. And so a kind of shorter, perhaps a bit more of an introduction. So if anybody's interested in that, and that involves a forum with other writers who would be writing in a similar area to you. So, it could be the kind of bit of motivation you need if you're in one of those giving up phases that Cynthia talked about. But that's been brilliant to hear from you both. So thank you for your time today. And thanks everybody for listening. I ran over slightly, I'm sorry. But thank you for sending your excellent questions in and for joining us tonight. And just to end on, wishing you the very best of luck with your writing. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you again, Cynthia and Steph.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.